Hi, welcome to the Amphizoology podcast. In this episode, we continue our discussion with Dr. Elizabeth Ormerod. So Dr. Ormerod is a veterinary surgeon who is the chairperson of Society for Companion Animal Studies, which is how I first became acquainted with Elizabeth, and all the wonderful work that she does for people and animals. As a small animal house physician, Elizabeth was responsible for Glasgow University's inner city charity veterinary clinic, during which period she became attuned to the significance of companion animals in the lives of vulnerable people. With multidisciplinary collaboration, she developed veterinary outreach programs delivering animal-assisted programs to schools, nursing homes, hospitals, sheltered housing and prisons. So my name is Chris and my research focuses on cat-human relations. Also, I have been involved with the Society for Companion Animal Studies, SCAS, since 2021, serving as a communications officer and joining the board at the end of 2023. So I'm delighted Elizabeth has agreed to join us today.
Hello, I'm Sarah and I'm studying unconventional shark-human relationships through a post-human lens. And I also have a passion in advocating for and researching abandoned cats in Saudi Arabia.
Hi, I'm Michelle, and my research has traditionally focused on human pachyderm relationships through the lenses of tourism, conservation, and One Health. I'm also lucky enough to have received a SCAS grant, along with my podcast colleagues, to study the human-cat and dog-human relationships in Nepal. We want to discover how to better support emerging bonds.
And, going back to bond centre practice, everything was about supporting the bond. So starting with pet selection. Then we took great care over educating owners in the first few months. And we'd get the puppies and kittens in every week to weigh them, like a baby clinic. And the nurses would do that. We did bespoke growth charts for each of them individually and plotted them against their expected growth. But the nurses would also ask how they're getting on with training and behaviour. So we were nipping lots of behaviour issues in the bud. And the animals were getting so used to coming to the practice that it wasn't something that was stressful for them in the future. And the clients realised that we were very interested in animals and in them. So they would be more open with us about any issues and come ahead of time, where otherwise there might have been a delay in treatment. We were able to check that they were on a good plane of nutrition, that they were up to date with their worming and their flea preventives. The dogs that were having behaviour issues was usually because the clients weren't experienced at having a dog. We could get them fast-tracked into the local dog training classes. So that was really good. And we had one of our staff members was very interested in dog and horse behaviour. And we ran an in-house behaviour clinic. We started that about 1990. We had in-house pet bereavement support, which we started in 1988. I was a bit worried about that because a lot of animals die in a practice. And on our worst day, we could lose five patients. And I was worried if we offered that people could come and see me for pet bereavement support. I didn't know how I could fit that in because each day was so packed with everything that we had to do. And I wrote a pet behaviour packet, so quite a thick wallet with lots of information about the stages of grief, what to expect, ways of coping, information about different things they could do, make shrines for their pets, what they could do for children, write poems, essays, do paintings, etc., and helpful poems. And in the first year, there was only a handful of people that actually had to come and see me because they'd got what they needed from the packet. And then even 20 years later, I could be doing a house visit to somebody and they would say, oh, while you're here, I just wanted to tell you that this packet's come in really handy. We kept it. And any neighbours or friends who lost a pet, we shared it with them and then we had it back. We've been sharing this out for years. And it's really interesting. And Dr Mary Stewart from the University of Glasgow She was the forerunner in studying pet loss and bereavement. And she worked with SCAS to develop the Pet Loss Support Service, which we launched in 1994. And then we ran that solely until we went into partnership with Blue Cross in 2000. And then we ran it jointly until we left Blue Cross in 2012. But a lot of people think it's been a Blue Cross initiative. It wasn't.
Oh, I thought it was, yeah.
No, it was a SCAS initiative.
It's amazing.
But it's so important. Vets, we need to step up and support our clients through pet loss. The minimum we should do is tell them about the pet loss support service that Blue Cross now runs. That's the minimum we should do. I'll tell you, it was just a guy came to the practice who'd never been before, and he had a little hamster. And unfortunately, when I examined Fred, he was terminally ill. He had a cancer. And this guy, unlike most of my clients, he looked like a city businessman, three-piece suit, immaculately dressed, immaculately groomed. And I euthanized his little hamster. And then I hovered over my pet loss packet thinking, he could be really annoyed and angry if I give him a pet loss packet because he looks so together. And then I had the voice in the back of my head from the lady that taught, the social worker that taught me in the States about pet loss support. Do not assume who needs the pet loss information. You cannot judge who needs this. So I got the packet, I gave it to him, and he opened it up and he sat down, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, my waiting room is actually jam-packed full of people. And is he about to launch into, how dare you give me this? Why have you given me that? Anyway, he started reading it, and then he fell apart. He sobbed and sobbed and sobbed, and I had to sit next to him. I actually had to cuddle him. And when he could speak, he said, I can't believe this. He said, you've never met me before. My little hamster has died. You've given me all this about how to cope. He said, my dad died 3 years ago. I got no support. I got no words of comfort. I got nothing. And I have been thinking, I can't carry on. I'm thinking, I just got to the point where I can't continue. But you've given me this. And I said, well, you need to contact Cruz Bereavement Care. And he says, what's that? I said, well, that's an organisation that supports people through human loss. And I gave him the contact details, and I gave him a hug. He gave me a huge bear hug, thanked me and left. And I thought, I think that little packet has saved his life.
That's incredible, isn't it? Yeah.
I got a lot of clients when we euthanized the pets and gave them explanations about the stages of grief, etc., and gave them the packet, and they would come back and thank us and say, we've never had any support like that from a hospital or the GP practice. They'd also remark upon how peaceful euthanasia is when it's the right time, and they wished that they could opt for that when the time comes for them. Which is very sad. But actually, I read about in America, some physicians spent time in a veterinary hospital to learn more about euthanasia, and they were converted because it wasn't what they'd imagined it would be like. So respectful and so peaceful, and dying with the family around them.
You talk about a lot of very important and poignant points, and I noticed from your slides that you say that you've done so many different things, like campaign for national legislation, presented meetings in the House of Commons, House of Lords, supported 3 private members' bills. Are you able to talk about some of that and how that's related to the human-animal bond, companion-animal bond?
Oh, the pets and housing issue is major. And as I said, I thought that was the easiest easiest thing to implement. So SCAS started campaigning on this when it was founded in 1979. I joined SCAS in 1986 during a conference in Boston. And I learned about pet inclusive housing there. During that conference, I went to the Massachusetts SSPCA, and they'd done work on pets and housing. And the concept of the pet owner committee, which is a really good thing to do, especially in flats and condominiums. And then I came back to my practice and thought, right, I just go to the local authority and the local council now and we'll get pet inclusive housing. But they weren't interested. And it was as though when I appeared at a council meeting, it was as though a vampire had come into the room. They'd be like this, stay away, we're not talking to you. And as they just want to talk about older people and pets. We're not interested. It's all very well for you to propose this, but if we try this and it doesn't work, we're the ones that will have egg all over our faces. And I said, no, just make me responsible. But they wouldn't. So I would then write to people in government and they would write back and say, this is a local authority issue. I then got involved in organising meetings about it. We had a meeting, I think the first one was in Manchester, about 1991, and then we had other meetings. SCAS organised meetings on pets and housing in Scotland, Wales, we did a number in London, and then some of the MPs picked up on it and they had private members' bills, and SCAS and that we supported the private members' bills. We went to the House of Commons, we presented in committee rooms, I presented at Scottish Parliament, back to the House of Commons, TV and radio. I was on national TV and radio programmes promoting it. And I'm thinking, this is a no-brainer. Why is this not happening? Just can't believe this. And then went to Brussels and spoke to MEPs. And you're thinking, and the problem is, meanwhile, the MPs are changing. So you might get some MPs that are supportive and then the next election they're not in. So it's just been like a nut that's been so difficult to crack. I went at my own expense to the USA again and met people there that had managed to get pets and housing legislation passed in the US in the early 1980s. I went to Japan and met people there that had managed to get pet inclusive housing policies in the city of Kobe after the Great Hanshin earthquake. That was interesting because this massive earthquake and thousands, I think hundreds of thousands of buildings collapsed. And the shelters that were created wouldn't admit people with pets. So older people with pets stayed on the streets through the winter because they'd nowhere to go. And then they built new accommodation specifically for older people, and the older people wouldn't sign up for it. And the housing chiefs, I met the housing chiefs, they said they couldn't understand it. It was only when they went to meet the older people on the streets with the pets and saw that they loved their animals and that they couldn't take the animals into the new accommodation, that's when they got it. And I was absolutely dumbfounded. How could people in a housing, like their job is housing, they don't go and meet people that are living outside in the cold to talk to them? Anyway, I just kept persisting here, and other members of SCAS, and one of our patrons is Sir Roger Gale, so he's doing work as well, and we established the pathway and the pathway guidelines for tenants, the pathway guidelines for landlords, and we keep plugging away and plugging away and plugging away, and you're like, and then I get to thinking, the thing that I thought I'd do in 2 to 4, I actually thought I'd do it in my town in 2 to 4 weeks. I'm actually going to die before it happens. And I said that at a conference in Davis in California. So I think I'm going to die before this pet inclusive policies. And then that's where I met Taryn Graham. And then we did another big SCAS conference on pets in housing. And then eventually we've set up an international pets and housing steering group. And Sandra McCoon is chairing that. She's a SCAS member. But it just feels like this is the one thing that should have been so easy, and it's been the most difficult. And other things that I thought would be, to get pets into prisons, I thought that'd be really difficult. To teach children about pets in schools and taking up school teaching time, that would be really difficult. I thought the professions wouldn't be interested in the bond, but they are. The pets and housing has been so difficult. Private landlords, they think that pets could damage the house. But there's actually research to show that people of all ages, children through to adults, do more damage to houses than pets. Some landlords just don't like pets and don't want pets in their properties. But my way of thinking, if you're a landlord, that's a business. And it's a person's home. And landlords shouldn't really be able to say, you're not having a pet, because people need to nurture. And there's so many health benefits from pets. It'd be like saying, right, you can stay in my house, but you're not going to eat healthy food. You're not going to have any vegetables because I don't like vegetables. But the health benefits of pets, we now know, are incredible. People with pets are a third less likely to have a heart attack or a stroke. Many more times likely to survive having a heart attack or a stroke. So why should a landlord be able to say, my preference is that you don't have to, you're just not going to have a pet? It's crazy. So we're now at the stage, there's a renters' rights bill is going through the House of Commons, and that will require that landlords can only refuse a pet on reasonable grounds. So all tenants of private landlords will have the right to ask for a pet, and the landlord can only refuse on reasonable grounds. But what are the reasonable grounds? So it will be interesting. It should help. But there are still people not helped. So people in social housing, a lot of social housing does allow pets, but a lot of it doesn't. That doesn't come under the umbrella of this bill. And then we've got people that live in properties where there's a lease, and the lease can prohibit pets, and this bill is not going to help those people either. So what I've read is that it would be regarded reasonable if there's a superior landlord for a building, so presumably a superior landlord and then lots of other landlords. If the superior landlord says no, then the other landlords can say no because the superior landlord says no. And that's just ridiculous. It's totally unfair.
I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the Bob Harvey Award that SCAS and our special friends have.
Well, this was a very sad case. So Bob Harvey lived in a nursing home in Scotland, in Dumfries and Galloway, the county where I now live. And I got a call from a colleague in one of the Scottish universities to say, do you know about this, Liz? And Bob, his wife, and their little Schnauzer dog had gone to live in the nursing home on the understanding, and it was a pet-friendly nursing home, on the understanding that they could spend out all the rest of their lives there. And Bob, he sold the family home to afford going into the nursing home. His wife died after a couple of years. He and his little dog Darcy stayed on. Then a new manager was appointed, and pretty quickly, Bob was told that he had to leave the home if he did not get rid of Darcy. And a social worker actually went to the nursing home to deliver that news. His social worker told him he had to give up his dog or be evicted. So I went to the nursing home within a few days of this, and I found this gentleman in a very distressed state. He wasn't able to eat or sleep. He was getting chest pains. He was trembling all over. He was experiencing a lot of pain and he could hardly talk. And the manager had cited a lot of behaviour issues to the dog. The dog was biting, barking, defecating and urinating indoors, doing just really bad behaviour. But I stayed there for several hours and I didn't witness any bad behaviour at all. And I went round the nursing home. I tried to speak to the staff. They said they couldn't speak to me because they were only staff members and they weren't allowed to talk to me. I saw no sign of the manager. The residents came up to me and said, don't let them take that wee dog away. That wee dog's perfect. That wee dog's our friend. We love that wee dog. Do not let them take that wee dog away. When I was leaving, I was in the car park. A large woman charged out of the nursing home towards me. And it was like getting charged down by a bull. So what do? You don't run. You just go to, I just went to her with my hand outstretched and she screeched to a halt on the gravel. Introduced myself as Dr Elizabeth Ormerod, Chair of SCAS, Vice President of the International Association of Human-Animal Interaction Organisations. How can I help you? She said, how dare you speak to the residents? I said, they spoke to me. I didn't engage them in conversation. They engaged me. They have no capacity. You cannot believe anything they said. And I said, well, that's very interesting because they were very coherent and they don't want Darcy to go. I said, so he's got behaviour issues. She said, yes. I said, what are they? I said again, what are the behaviour issues? Asked her for a third time and she said, well, you'll have to look in the newspapers. So the behaviour issues were fabricated and she couldn't remember what she said. So the upshot was Bob had a young friend, Tracy Street, who's very good at IT, and she set up a change.org petition. And we ended up with over 300,000 signatures for Bob to keep his dog, coming in from all over the world. And people from all over the world sending Bob cards of support. And the manager she was very angry. And she would go into Bob's room without knocking, just barge into his room. She would finger stab him, tell him to stop the campaign. I will get the police to you. We should have put a hidden camera in his room. She was finger stabbing him and making him cry. And then she forbade him taking Darcy downstairs. So when he went downstairs to the recreation room, and he found it difficult walking, he had a stick. And also, he was a dialysis survivor. He'd been on dialysis for over 20 years. He was the longest surviving dialysis patient at the hospital. And he was 87 years old. When he got downstairs, she would come in and say, you'll need to go back upstairs, Bob. That Darcy's out of your room and he's all over there upstairs causing trouble. Because she'd let him out. And then they banned Bob from taking Darcy for walks in their extensive grounds. There's all this land round about and Rhododendron Avenue. He wasn't allowed to exercise Darcy there. We'd volunteers going in from the county to take them out in the car and take him for a walk. And Leslie Winton, SCAS board member from Fostering Compassion, she befriended Bob and she would take him and Darcy out for the day. But the bullying got so bad that Tracy then did a Just Giving page and we managed to get enough money to move Bob out of the nursing home into a bungalow with carers. But Bob was amazing because a lot of the older people that I've helped, they wouldn't have been able to stand up to somebody like that. He was just so determined. He was not going to break his bond with his wee dog. He loved his wee dog. He'd never had children and Darcy was his boy. and he wasn't giving them up. So SCAS then created the Bob Harvey Award to commemorate people that are doing a lot to keep pets and people together. So the first awards actually it's an international award, so people from all over the world can apply. The first awards went to Israel and Australia, and more recently went to South America, Colombia. But it just makes I just get so angry. And the symptoms that Bob was showing, the nausea and the retching and the pain, I've seen that in other older people in the same kind of situation. So I'd one lady, I'd never seen her before. She came to the practice, an older lady. She was in her 80s, not in good health. She came to the practice with a huge cat basket, and she couldn't talk to me for nearly half an hour. She just stood and cried. And when she was able to talk, she told me she brought the cats because she couldn't keep them anymore, because she was moving into sheltered accommodation. And when she'd been interviewed, she was told the cats wouldn't be a problem. So she signed the lease to go into the sheltered accommodation. And then when she'd paid for it to be redecorated, had a phone in, had new carpet, she was told she couldn't keep her cats. And I said, well, look, I've taken on this. It was a housing association. I've taken them on before and I've never lost, but I just have to do it case by case. And each case would take me a month. I said, but we'll take your case. And she said, but if you do, will they not victimise me? And I said, oh, they're not. They'll have me to deal with if they try and victimise you. So she let me take the case. I made a case for support explaining how the cats helped her health conditions. As usual, I got a letter of support from the MP and from her GP. And she presented that to the housing association, but they wouldn't budge. They said no, she wasn't to keep her cats. And then she phoned me and said, Elizabeth, they're coming to see me on Wednesday at 2:00. She said, I think they're going to tear me apart. And I said, well, I could be there. Oh, could you come? I said, yeah, I'll be there. So at 2:00 on that Wednesday, I went to the flat. I hadn't been to see it before. It was tiny. I've never seen accommodation as tiny. Not even in prison, I've not seen anything as tiny. She had one room, it was a bedsit. It wasn't big enough for a bed and a chair. And she said, I'm not going to sit on my bed through the day. So she bought a bed settee so that through the day it could be a chair, and at night she'd open it into a bed. Her toilet was in a broom cupboard. And she had to share a bath with men on the landing. They'd given her an upstairs flat, but she could hardly walk. The kitchenette was just a sink and a draining board on one side and a cooker on the other. It was terrible. Anyway, I arrived before the housing association people, and I just had to perch on the windowsill, which was quite good because the sun was streaming in and all they could see was my silhouette. They couldn't see who I was. I was just a shape to them. And they came in and they launched a verbal and physical attack on the woman. They finger stabbed her. They told her she was stupid. You've obviously dementia. You can't remember. You have a short-term memory. I told you quite clearly you couldn't have these cats. When she got a word in, she said, she was Miss Peddy, she said, I told you that I needed to keep the cats. No, you did not, blah, 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 blah. So I let that go on for a wee bit to incriminate themselves. And then I said, excuse me, stop. And they looked at me and I said, do not speak to my client like that. And the woman officer, her face had been bright red. It drained very quickly to white. And she said, are you not her niece? I said, no. So it was actually her niece that she'd been in this accommodation with these two cats for 12 years, nursing her brother and her sister-in-law. And the last few years of their lives, they'd been terminally ill. And she'd done all the nursing. Within a couple of weeks of the death of the sister, the niece appeared and said, "Get out of the house, this is my house." And then she'd arranged accommodation with the housing authority. Are you not the niece? No. I'm her veterinary surgeon. Why can't she have the cats? Well, as you can see, it's a very small flat. And I said, actually, it's a very small flat. I've never seen a flat as small as this. You know, this is smaller than the prison cell. I advise the prison service on animals in prison. And said, I can see a really good story here. And I'm not talking the local paper. I'm talking national. This is going to be big because I place cats with men who've committed murder. And their accommodation's better than this. And here we've got an older lady she's actually spent the last 40 years nursing family members that were terminally ill. She's now got a flat that's worse than the prison cell, and she's not allowed a cat. Well, this is interesting. But I said, look, this is my list of contacts. Have a look. These are people that I work with every week. The BBC, the Mirror, the Observer, the Times. I know all these journalists, and we'll get a really good story out of it. You wish you had never done this, but I'll give you 48 hours. I promise I won't do anything for 48 hours. And they left. The next morning, she was advised that she had a house on the ground floor that had a big sitting room big enough for a 3-piece suite, a bathroom with a bath, all for herself, a big kitchen, a lovely bedroom big enough for double bed, a front and a back door and a front and a back garden, and a lower rent. So.
And keep the cats?
Yes, but I look back and I think there was something wrong with that flat. Why did they jump so high? It must have been illegal. How could you have accommodation for an older person that can't have a bed and a chair in the room? So tiring having to, and the stress, because I was so worried about these people. I was sure that some of these older people were going to die before we got things resolved, which usually took a month. And they were so distressed. We had a situation where new sheltered accommodation was put up along one whole long street in town. And some of it was run by the local authority, and the rest was run by a private sheltered accommodation. And if they went into the local authority one, they could take the pet, but never get another one if that pet died. But the private one, the one that was operated by a private company, they could not take any pets into it. And I had several clients who were so born, they just weren't going to give up the pets. So some of them smuggled them in. I had another guy and his wife with a beautiful whippet, and he didn't want to break the rules. So I found him a client in the next street that was prepared to do bed and breakfast for the whippet. And then they would pick her up every morning. She wasn't allowed in their house, so they would spend the whole day in different nursing homes. I registered her as a pat dog, and they just went from nursing home to nursing home. And they did that for a year. And then they came and they said, we can't keep, it's too depressing. We make friends with people in the nursing home. They're the same age as us, and then they die. We can't keep doing this. It's really distressing. So we're just going to have to take her in the house. We'll just have to do it. And I had this other guy, Mr. Hargreaves, and he had a lovely tortoise shell, 12-year-old tortoise shell called Trixie. And one day, the housing manager came unannounced. Mr. Hargreaves saw him through the window and he hid Trixie, but he didn't move her dish. And the housing manager came in, he saw the cat dish, and he then shouted at Mr. Hargreaves. And he then wrote to everybody in all that accommodation and said he was giving them so many days to get rid of the pets, then they would be evicted. And Edward and I, we'd been on holiday and we came back, and there was about a dozen older people in the practice reception crying. And they'd all received this letter. So I said, look, what we'll do, we'll set up a pet owner committee. I'll meet you tomorrow. We'll draft rules like they do in Massachusetts. So we sat down, we drafted the guidelines for pet keeping. And I thought, I'm not taking that to Mr. Pomfret, the manager. I'm going to the board. So I sent it to the board. And then I got a lovely phone call from I'll just wind back. Mr. Hargreaves was so upset. And he said to me, Mrs. Ormerod, I never married, so I never had any children. But Trixie is my granddaughter. So anyway, I got a phone call. Just must have been as soon as the housing association, the private sheltered accommodation had my drafted pet owner committee. And it was the chairwoman, and she said, we didn't know that Mr. Pomfret had sent that letter. He did that without permission. And we are accepting in full the pet owner committee recommendations, the rules that you've set up, including that they can get pets in the future if their pet dies. So that was my biggest pets and housing success in my town over a period of 28 years. It's ridiculous that it had to be that way.
So is that nursing home still allowing pets, still keeping the
Well, it was the Windmill Housing Association. It was sheltered accommodation.
And they've still got that protocol in place?
As far as I know.
Fantastic.
But it's things do change when new managers go in. This is why we need national legislation to protect people and pets. And the lack of pet inclusive accommodation at all levels is one of the big drivers for animals going into shelters and then not being able to be adopted, because there's people that would adopt, but they haven't got, they can't find pet friendly accommodation to live in. It's ridiculous, because if you look at the health benefits of having pets, it's been calculated that just through the 15% fewer GP visits that pet owners make, we're saving the country 2.45 billion annually. But that doesn't factor in the improved cardiovascular health and all the other benefits of pet, the better mental health. It doesn't factor any of that in.
Yes.
And the savings for people that have assistance dogs, the savings are phenomenal. They need less care. Their care package is reduced once they have an assistance dog. So to not allow pets is just the biggest lack of joined up thinking.
Yeah, no, it's an uphill struggle, right? And we talk quite a bit about this concept of compassion fatigue, particularly amongst shelter workers. But I mean, obviously veterinarians in particular, if they have to deal with a lot of deaths and yeah, with these really emotional cases that you talk about, that you've got involved in, it takes an emotional toll. And I wonder, there's obviously not enough support for the carers, right? Veterinarians and veterinary social workers. And how do you cope?
What has helped me is when I went out to all the different professions to teach them about the bond and went out to the schools and the nursing homes and the prison, etc., I was, without realising it, building a huge social support network for myself in the practice. So after I had that network, there was no problem that was too big. And I got a lot of support from social workers in particular. And I could have a really difficult situation in the practice and think, I don't really know the best way to handle this, but I'll ring somebody who does know how to handle something like this. So I had access to psychiatric nurses and GPs and all sorts of professions. And sometimes they would say, come and discuss this with us over coffee. It was very rare that I would actually share who the client was. But sometimes, with it being a small town, I would discuss a situation. They go, oh, I think I know who that is. Is that so? And so I go, yes, it is. Yes, this is an ongoing issue. Leave it to us. The mental health team will sort that out. So we had, and then they would come to me with animal-related problems. So I think every vet practice should have a range of professionals in the community that they can work with. Because again, it's working on our own and not having support that causes vets to have mental health problems and can lead to suicide. But once I had that team, there was never a day where I thought, I can't cope with this, because I could just turn to somebody and run a situation past them, and they would give me chapter and verse. They could say, oh, give them this phone number, do this, have you asked this? This is the organisation they need to contact, blah, blah, blah. It's brilliant. And when my kids were going through the teenage years, and sometimes things were getting a bit out of control, I could just turn to the social workers and say, any advice on this? Yes. This is what.
By supporting the community, they supported you back. That's great.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
But that was, what I say to vets now is, if I was to be a young vet again and going into a community, instead of going to see them one at a time, which took a long, it was a huge effort, I would call a town hall meeting, invite all the professions and talk to them about the human-animal bond and the importance of it for all the various professions, teach them about the link and the health benefits and so on, teach them about animal assisted services, do it all, get them all in the room together. And this is another thing that I learned. So I used to call meetings when I had a concern in town about actions of the council that were at odds with what was best for town, particularly around wildlife and the human-animal bond. I could just call a public meeting and all the professions would come. And they came up to me one night and said, we really envy you. And I said, why? I said, I envy you because I'm like a lone worker here. I have to do lots of stuff, whereas you work in big teams. There's loads of you. They said, no, but you can call meetings. We can't call a meeting. If we, in social services, had a concern about this, we would need to write a proposal that would go to our manager, and then they would take it to their next meeting of the next level, and then eventually it would get to the board, and then it would come back down through all the levels, and it would come back to us about a year later, but it would be changed all the way along. It would come back as something completely different, and it wouldn't make sense anymore. The situation would have passed to something else. You are independent. You can call a meeting and we can all come. And then we can all do work toward, what the solution will be. We had some big environmental problems in town, and the surgery was able to be used as the centre for, like, the action centre. Could hold meetings at the surgery and write papers. So we had one big one was, it was decided by North West Water that Blackpool sewage would come to our town because it was a problem and they weren't going to treat it. They were just going to dump it in the bay. And we worked in teams. We had multidisciplinary people all involved, but we worked in different teams. So we'd the harbour master and the fishermen worked out all the tides, what would happen with the sewage when it went out, with the fishermen that would report, and the zoologists and the botanists, what was going to happen to the wildlife. We had the vets, and my husband's a pathologist, working with the GPs about the health implications, and the tourism people. We had all the different professions working together, and we forced a public inquiry. And it didn't go ahead. It went ahead with a big treatment plant. But it was just, we had several situations like that where we had to galvanise the whole town and the professions, and we were able to do it because we could call meetings.
It's amazing. That really, it's there's a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of thought that you've put into so many different aspects of the bond, human-animal bond, for sure.
So it was just very satisfying to be able to do that. And because we'd worked with all the different agencies, we had all the connections needed to do the work.
Yeah, yeah.
We also did, every year we did art, poem and essay competitions for all the schools. And we would pick the theme relevant to what the issue was. So that was really good. So the swans were at risk from the action of the local council, and we were able to bring together all the different ages, all the schools, the nursing homes, the hospitals, all the staff, and force things so that the swans got saved. But the Queen actually got involved in that one.
Wow, that's amazing.
And our MP got carpeted in front of the Prime Minister.
Seem to have a real skill at getting. Seem to have a real skill at getting all these people together and bringing them to discussion.
Well, it was because of the human-animal bond. I was working with all these different agencies, and then when there was a crisis, we could quickly get support.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
The other thing about, you know, having the bond centre practice, it lets the practice staff all work together as a unified team.
Yeah.
So if we had a case, for example, of suspected abuse, we would get input from everybody in the practice. If we had a behaviour problem in an animal, we would want input from everybody in the practice about what they had seen in the practice and in the community, or feedback. Because it was a small town, you'd get feedback of, oh, so-and-so, yeah, went to visit that dog and this happened. So we were then able to create a more safe community. Another instance, we had a guy walked in one day, we didn't know him, and he had a little hairy black dog with him. And he said the dog was to be euthanised. And the staff are looking at the dog and they're thinking, that's laddie so-and-so. That looks like laddie so-and-so. So they got on the phone to laddie so-and-so's grandma. And her daughter was going through a divorce. And her ex had arranged to pay somebody to bring the wee dog for euthanasia. But because we're a small community, the staff not only recognised the dog, but knew the grandma's phone number.
Yeah, that's, oh my goodness. I mean, I'm sure that happens in lots of different places, but yes, absolutely, because you've got small folk that focus.
Yeah. It's one of the reasons for convenience killings, unwarranted euthanasia, is somebody getting at somebody by having the pet euthanized.
Are there any changes to that with the microchip laws now, though? Is it not the person who the animal is registered to has to now give them it?
You know, one of a couple could come in and just say, it's usually the person that's their partner when they're splitting up would do this. So I do a workshop for vet students and I say, if you get a case of unwarranted euthanasia where you know what is going on, you spend a long time trying to get to the bottom of it. What is behind it? And we had a practice policy. We wouldn't euthanize an animal unless it was indicated that it's in the animal's best interest. So if they were terminally ill, or if they had a very serious aggression problem, that would be the only times that we would euthanize. But you want to get to the bottom of these cases. Some people will have pets euthanized before they are lost to suicide. As a precursor to suicide, they'll have the pets euthanized.
Yeah.
So I joined SCAS, and then I just met people from all these other professions that are on the same wavelength, and I'd found my tribe.
Okay, so thanks for joining us on the Amphizoology podcast. It's been great talking to you, Dr. Ormerod. So until next time, we'll wave goodbye from the Amphizoology podcast.
Thank you for having me.